Welcome to A Change in Story, a podcast about the moments that reshape how we see ourselves and the world around us. In today's episode, you'll hear the story of Debbie Weiss, who at 50 realized she no longer wanted to be a victim to her circumstances and began prioritizing herself after decades of family caregiving. Her shift in perspective not only led to a new way of approaching life, but it also inspired her to write a book about her experiences. However, right as she was embarking on writing her memoir, Debbie was thrust into a new caregiving role when her husband became ill. Take a listen to hear how Debbie approached caregiving this time around and how writing became a lifeline and ultimately opened doors she never thought possible. Thanks for joining today, Debbie, and for sharing your story. What would you say was the turning point for you when you realized that you wanted to make a change?
Well, I'd say before I turned 50, I had been a caregiver to many of my family members already for decades. And I found myself at 50 realizing that I had lived my life to care for everyone else and forgot about myself. And so that realization really, not that I would change caring for my ill family members, I wouldn't change that, but I lost myself in the process, and that wasn't necessary. So at 50, I kind of had a little bit of a wake up call where I said, you know, let's just say I'm halfway through my life. Let's hope I have 50 years left. Now I've got to do something to change what I've been doing. And so that started a very long process, which I'm still on, and I think I'll be on, and everyone will be on until we stop breathing, right? Of discovering myself, prioritizing myself, and really learning so much about myself. And so I had been in that process and had many different avenues, that I had gone down. And at that point in time, I was really, it seemed like the universe was whispering to me, you got to write a book. And I kept saying, that's ridiculous. I have no desire to write a book. I don't know how to write a book. It just was so crazy. But I just kept hearing either people putting that idea in my head, something kept coming up. And then one day I was listening to a podcast that I was just an occasional listener to. And the host was interviewing a woman who helped first time authors get their stories out there. And I really liked her from listening to her on the podcast. And I thought, okay, let me just call this lady, and see what she has to say. And I did. And, we met over Zoom and I loved her. And she really instilled in me the belief that I could do it. And that even more importantly, that my story was impactful because I thought, I never had, thank goodness, a huge trauma. Some books are like, oh my gosh, I got, my arm bitten by a shark, or I, was stuck on Mount Everest, or like I didn't have any of those things. And, she explained to me, let's face it, what kind of books, it is inspiring to read those kinds of things, but can I personally relate to that? Thank goodness, no. I can relate to someone who's just kind of experienced those little traumas in life that kind of add up like we all have. So anyhow, she was about to launch a small group coaching program for first-time authors. And, it wasn't cheap, and money was an issue, and I was scared out of my mind, but I was about to take the leap when my husband, out of the blue, was diagnosed with terminal blood cancer. And I was seeing a therapist at the time, and I said to the therapist, obviously, I can't take this now. I will, I don't know what the next few months, years, whatever, I'm sure she'll be offering it again. And when things kind of calm down, however, whatever that looks like, then I'll take the course. And she said, I disagree with you. You need to take it now. And I said, now? How do I do that? I don't know what my life is going to look like. I also have a small insurance agency, so I, was worried about how was that going to work and what I needed to do for my husband and my kids and all the things. The last thing, it seemed illogical to start some new project that I didn't even know if I could do. And I said to her, well, what happens if, I miss a week of the class or there's homework and I'm not able to get the homework done? And she said to me, who cares? And I thought, yeah, you know what? You're right. Who cares? I don't need to be the perfect A student. I just need to do what works for me and remove that guilt that sometimes I think, we put on ourselves for not being quote unquote perfect, which none of us are, not achieving what we, think we should. So I joined and I really connected with the other women in the group. I think there was only like four or five of us. And I looked forward to those Tuesdays when we were meeting. And it was difficult. I don't think as a matter of fact, not I don't think, I did not believe that I was actually going to do it. I just thought, all right, maybe she'll teach me how to do it. And when I'm ready, I'll do it. But somewhere along the line, I gained some clarity around what I was writing, what I was doing. And once that happened, I decided that I was going to make it happen by scheduling in times to write on most days. And that could have been before my husband woke up. I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go into my kitchen and write. Or if he was in the hospital, I'd bring my computer or my stuff with me. And when he was sleeping or went down for a test or whatever, I would write. And sometimes nothing came out. I would just rewrite the same sentence over and over and say, oh gosh, I have no idea what I want to say. And other times, stories that I was telling just poured out of me. And as I continued on, I think when I got to, I learned that word count is a big thing. So when I got to like 10,000 words, I thought, wow, I wrote 10,000 words. I might just be able to do this. And my husband was diagnosed in June of 22, and he died December 30th of the same year. And when he died, I was 3 chapters shy of finishing my memoir. And when I finished, which by the way, it was over 80,000 words, which just blew me away that I wrote that many words. When I finished, I was supposed to have the the first draft to the editor by January 15th, so 2 weeks afterwards, after he passed away. And of course, they told me, don't be ridiculous. We'll change the timeline, whatever works for you. And, uh, when you lose someone, people come and they gather, and, that's what it's all about. And everybody was there for me, and it was very emotional. But then what happens is a week later, everyone leaves. And you go back to what is supposed to be your life, but your life will never be the same. And unless someone's lived through it, they don't understand. So everybody else is like, okay, that's over. And they just go back to living. And I was sitting here thinking, how am I going to do this? Where do I go from here? How do I stop crying? And I decided that writing the memoir had really gotten me through those past 6 months. And it's going to help me now because this is just as hard this time, if not harder. And so I focused and I finished by January 15th.
Which is huge.
Which was amazing, amazing. And, I learned a lot about the whole process. And so I thought, oh, good, I'm done, only to find out, oh, no, there's a lot more that comes after that first draft. But you know what? That was January of 23. My book came out August 9th of 23. And in those 7 months, those hardest months after I lost my husband, this whole experience of learning something new and having this to look forward to, when am I going to actually hold this thing that I've created? It helped me so much during that time as well.
Mhm. Well, I'm sorry for your loss,
Thank
and
you.
definitely a difficult experience to move through. But what a cool thing for your therapist to encourage you to do, to
Mm.
hold that for you and to push you a little bit.
Oh, she's a genius. Actually, I don't see her anymore, and I often think I really need to go back and tell her. And I probably did at the time. I saw her, through the time my husband passed away, but I really need to go back and tell her how impactful, you know, what she did. It really did change my life.
What was it like to go back to being in a caregiving role after you had had that realization around 50 that maybe the way you were approaching caregiving in the past wasn't working for you?
I mean, it definitely brought up uh, that whole being immersed in caregiving and losing myself. And I think that I had learned that that's what I had done for decades. I became my dad's caregiver when I was 17, and he lived for 30 years. So I was his caregiver for quite some time. And then my oldest son was diagnosed on the autism spectrum when he was 2, and then also has added other mental illness diagnoses. And so that was a different type of caregiving. And through those times when my son was younger, and it was so intense, the caregiving and the advocating at that point, I didn't prioritize myself. I was completely burned out. And so at this point, I was, I guess, 58 when my husband was diagnosed. And so I did learn to prioritize my own self care, because writing that book was my self care. And I think so often we don't equate self care with something like that, right? It's like take a break, read a book, take a bath, have a massage, like, and those things too, but it just doesn't come in that form. And I know that prior to turning 50 in this situation, I would never have done that because I believed caring for myself was selfish.
Which can be an important distinction and even somewhat of a paradox in that the more you care for yourself, the better able you are to show up for others.
Absolutely. And I saw it in the difference in the way I showed up, right? When I wasn't caring for myself, I was constantly on edge. My father could look at me cross-eyed and I'd just start screaming at him because I had so much pent-up resentment, even though it wasn't his fault. If you're thinking logically, you know that, but I still had this resentment and this anger inside of me, like, why me? Why has my life been about this? I was feeling very sorry for myself. And I didn't understand then that I had this victim mentality of looking at myself as a victim of my circumstances. And by the time I wrote the memoir, that belief had shifted and really made a huge difference during an extremely difficult 6 months.
And what was it like to take that risk on yourself that I'm going to write this book? I'm guessing there was fear coming up of, like you said, can I actually do this?
Oh my goodness, big time. As a matter of fact, I still have it. Now I've written another book and a workbook and a journal, and like I have all these things, and I still cannot call myself a writer. I still have imposter syndrome. And I think it's because it's really obviously imposter syndrome is just your own belief system. And I think in my mind, how can I be a writer? Because I've never had any training. I don't know specifically how to, create certain scenes that, you know, help the reader visualize it using adjectives in a certain way. And like, no, I don't have any of that. My writing sounds just like this. I'm talking and I put it on paper. That's what it sounds like. And so I think in my mind, that to me is not a writer. And I've learned that's okay. I think I'm a little more comfortable with calling myself an author
Oh, okay.
because there is a distinction in my own mind. Maybe not, but in my own mind, there's a distinction.
Can I ask what the distinction is for you?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that a writer is someone who's passionate about writing, has honed the skill of writing. I think of them as a journalist, communications major, a writer who writes for a living. That's what I envision when I think of a writer. And an author is someone who's penned something, right? So I have done that. I have, written books, so I'm an author.
Well, it's cool how you defined it for yourself, which then helped you to get over that hump, maybe of I can do this too.
Yes, exactly. It's just it's so interesting to me that it's all in your own head.
Hmm.
And there's so much in there to uncover and you know, try to change that narrative.
Well, spoiler alert, you've also now written a second book as a follow up to the first. So it definitely sounds like you overcame that hurdle.
You know what? It's a perfect example of you don't you think you know yourself, right? And you think you know what you're capable of, what you're not capable of, and then you stay in that lane for the most part. And honestly, I have discovered, I would have told you, I told everyone, I don't have a creative bone in my body. I believe that 100%, there was no doubt, no creativity to write or art or crafts or anything like that. Nothing. And since I've been on this journey, it's like I had a little thing in my head, a little door that popped open, and just I can't stop wanting to create things. And it, I never, ever, I never, what if I never had, stepped out of my comfort zone to discover what I am capable of? I had no idea, no idea. And it's so empowering.
And if you could look back to that prior version before you turned 50, what's the difference between how you would describe yourself then and how you would describe yourself now?
It really is night and day. I can't believe how the person that I've become. Back then, I was, like I said earlier, I was, always stressed out. I was on that hamster wheel, you know, same thing every day, worried about everybody else, putting out fires, either at home, at work, whatever it was, and just, I would say, surviving. And from the outside looking in, I don't think it looked that way. I live in a very nice house that I'm very grateful for in a wonderful neighborhood. I had the husband, the two kids, I have my insurance agency, like what do I have to complain about? And like most people, nobody knows what's really going on and the challenges that you really are facing.
Mhm.
And now my days are so different. I have really created more freedom in my life. I learned through the last decade or so that I don't, I also had this belief with my insurance agency. You need to be there early. You need to stay late every single day. Like otherwise, my team is going to think I don't care or I'm not invested or they're going to say, well, why is she working less than us or not doing as much? And when my husband was sick, my team now I've been this is being an insurance agent is actually my second career, but I've been an agent now for over 30 years and one of my employees has been with me 29. And so very comfortable leaving her quote unquote in charge. And so when those 6 months that my husband was ill, I checked in, but I didn't check in every day. And I maybe stopped in once a week for 3 hours. And I was, I wasn't there. And after it was all over, and I went back and I sat down with that team member and I said to her, be honest with me. How was it? How did you find these last 6 months? And she shocked me with her answer because she told me it was empowering. And I realized that I had been micromanaging and I was not giving my team a chance to grow. And that was such a gift and a big mindset shift because now maybe I get in between 9:30 and 10. And today, the day we're recording it, one day a week is my day I never go into the office. And so it's given me that freedom, not rushing in the morning, not having that self-imposed deadline. You've got to leave at 8, you've got to be there at 8:30, otherwise, thinking all these thoughts. And so just that freedom to kind of come and go. And I know that everybody does not have that freedom. And I feel incredibly, incredibly lucky for that. But that's a big game changer because now my life feels like I'm designing it, not someone else.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing your story and how your perspective on caregiving has shifted over the years and also led to pretty big life changes. Do you have anything else you'd like to add that I haven't asked or anything that you'd like to leave people with?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yes, I want to leave everyone with a quote that but I did not understand until I started this process. And it's from Glinda the Good Witch, who said, "You always have the power, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself." And I thought that just meant, Dorothy, you could have clicked your heels 3 times at the beginning of the movie, said there's no place like home, and you would have gotten home. You had that power with those shoes. But really, it is so much more than that. That's just the surface, right? It is that you've had the power. Every single one of us has the power. We just have to learn it. And that is, that has really been the story of my life, that quote, I think.
Be sure to check out Debbie's memoir, On Second Thought, Maybe I Can, as well as her second book, The Sprinkle Effect, at her website, debbieweiss.com, which is linked in the episode description. Thanks for listening and take care.